morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. It's great to see you today. And we're excited to have you on this Best Application Advice webinar. So I'm Bruce DelMonico, Assistant Dean for Admissions, joined by my fellow Assistant Dean colleague Laurel Grodman. And over the next hour that we have with you, it's noon US Eastern Time. We should be done by 1 p.m. US Eastern Time. The hope for us in this session is to be able to give you as much and as good application advice and maybe more grammatical application advice as we can and as you're preparing your Yale SOM application. In the spirit of the day, we've kind of Yaled ourselves up and we're going full Yale gear to try to kind of make it as Yale as possible. But we were hoping to really give you our best thoughts to help you as you're navigating the application process. Just quickly, by way of background, so again, I'm Bruce DelMonico. I'm a New Haven native, love the area. Love being in New Haven. In addition to being at Yale, I've been at the university for over 20 years. Been involved in building applications, sitting in the admissions committee, and hoping to share as many insights as I can from that experience as possible today.
And I'm Laurel Grodman. I have spent a lot of time at Yale and had a lot of time to build up my Yale gear collection here. I'm a Yale College graduate, more importantly, Yale School of Management graduate, and have been working at Yale for just about 15 years now, much of which has been here in admissions. I oversee our evaluation process, building our application. I run committee for our admissions process, and I also oversee our admissions team for our master's in asset management program, if anyone is interested in that.
So we have collectively lots of experience in an MBA admissions, generally at Yale, so I'm specifically hoping to share those insights. I would say before we get going, we've disabled the Q&A and the chat. This is not an interactive session. We have lots coming up. We have Q&As. I have office hours early next week. Lots of sessions where you can ask questions and there's more of an interactive back and forth. The idea here is for us to be able to get through as much of the content as possible to give you as many insights as we can. So there won't be as much of a back and forth in this session, but we do have other sessions where you can ask your questions. And I'd just love to kick it off just to start by saying we put a lot of thought into how we construct the application, what we ask, when we ask it, how we view it. And again, the idea is to give insights about how we think about the application over the next hour in the hope that it will help you as you prepare your application. So just quickly, just giving a little bit of historical background, the application, it's not a static document. It's evolved over the years. It continues to evolve. One example I could give, we used to have 4 application essays, then 2, and now 1. We changed what the number of essays are. We changed what the question is, but it's not just reducing things. We've also, as we've reduced the number of essays, we've added video questions and behavioral assessment, trying to diversify the range of inputs that we are asking to allow you to present a fuller picture of yourself and also to be fair and more consistent in our approach in our evaluation. So again, the application, it evolves, it changes over the years. And we think about both what's predictive of the outcomes we care about, success in the program and beyond, what we can evaluate well, and looking at whether there are other things that are more predictive, we could evaluate better, more consistently, and more efficiently. So it's all part of the process. Some of the ways in which the application has changed in the last couple of years, we've added over, I'd say, probably the last half dozen or more years, more questions about your background, context in which you have studied and worked to get more nuance in terms of those experiences you've had. We've also expanded our entrepreneurial questions over the last couple of years to get a better sense of those of you who do have an entrepreneurial background, which are a significant number of you. We worked with Kyle Jensen, who leads our entrepreneurship center, to get a sense of, more of an understanding of that background and maybe how those what you've done connect to your aspirations. So we're also very mindful of how much time it takes to complete the application. So we really try to ask only questions that are relevant to the decisions we make. We try to keep it lean. And so we're also mindful not just to add things, but to subtract and have a good balance. So when we added the video questions, for example, we eliminated the English language requirements. So no one who applies to Yale SOM has to complete the TOEFL or the IELTS or any other English language test. So again, we're mindful of what's helpful to us, what's relevant to us, what's predictive, what's fair and consistent, but also what you need to do to go through the process, to be mindful of your time and be efficient with that as well. So we tend to think of it as a dialogue, and we signal what we care about as we construct the application and what we ask, and we ask you to share about things about yourself in response, and it's very much a back and forth in the process.
Thanks, Bruce. And building off of what Bruce shared, we really do try to keep things streamlined and focus on things to ask you that are going to give us direct information about the things that we care about in our assessment. And we try to be really transparent and straightforward about what those things are. So I would think about it as really threefold. We're looking to understand your academic preparation for a rigorous MBA program, so your performance in the classroom, and doing our best to predict that. We're looking at your potential for professional success, so we're looking at the impact that you've made in professional settings as both a leader and a collaborator. And we're looking to understand your propensity to contribute to the communities and the organizations that you're a part of. So really everything that we're asking you in the application gives us information about one or more of those elements, sometimes all three, depending. But again, we're really trying to keep the application tight and streamlined to gain information that's going to give us relevant data points to get at those three measures. And in that, we engage in what's called, and I'm sure many of you have heard the term before, holistic review. So it means that we look at all of the application elements in combination. All of it is relevant, all of it is relative. So there's no specific weight that we're giving to any one aspect. It's all sort of dependent on what you bring to us as a whole. So I think a really concrete example of that is how we look at specifically your quantitative preparation. So if you have majored in something in your undergraduate studies that's highly quantitative and you did really well in that coursework, and we have a thorough kind of understanding and confidence of your quantitative ability, the quantitative section of your GMAT or your GRE is going to carry less weight in the application process because we've already been able to glean that information. Conversely, if you don't have that background, if you haven't had that same exposure, we'll need to rely more heavily on the quantitative portion of your GMAT or your GRE in order to gain that. So I think that that's a nice kind of clean example of how holistic admissions works in practice and helps sort of understand there isn't one particular weight that we're giving to every single aspect of your application across our entire kind of application pool. And then finally, we're looking to assemble a class that's diverse across a whole range of dimensions, your backgrounds, your experiences, the perspectives you bring, the geography that you represent or have worked in or lived in. So there's no one ideal background for gaining entry into SOM. We really value that diversity of perspectives that people bring from many, many different backgrounds and experiences. And that plays a role in our holistic admissions approach as well.
Great, thank you. And now that you have that history and that background, we love to spend a good bit of time, maybe the majority of the time, asking. So we're going to ask questions back and forth between us about specific questions about elements of the application, elements of the process. These are questions that are maybe the most common, or some of the most common ones we hear, and we thought they'd be the most relevant to you and most helpful to you as you're thinking about your application to Yale SOM. And we'll wrap it up at the end with some general insights and some general best advice. So we do have time set aside for some non-admissions, maybe some of our New Haven and Yale favorites, just to mix things up a little bit. We'll see if we have time, and hopefully we do. But as a next step, we'd love to just ask ourselves some of those common questions that we hear. As I said, that tends to be, that hopefully will be very helpful for you as you're thinking about the process. And I guess if I could ask the first one, that just obviously, very basically, how do we read an application? What are the mechanics for reading an application?
Yeah, so it actually starts a little less than a month from now, where our entire team of admissions officers will sit in a 2-day long reader training. So no matter how long you've been doing this, including Bruce, who's been doing this for eons, everybody sits through 2 days of going through our entire application reading process and really digging into every element of the application that we're looking at to make sure that no matter who happens to get your application on a given day, for review, we're all looking at it consistently and in the same rigorous way. So that's the very start of the application reading process. But more mechanically, every application receives at least 2 reviews, sometimes more, depending on the individual circumstances. But at least 2 members of our admissions team will give your application a comprehensive review. And then in terms of actually reviewing the elements of the application, there isn't a lot that is prescribed, so there is a little bit of individual kind of reader agency in terms of what they're digging into in what order. But we actually present the application in a somewhat leading way, and I suspect a lot of our readers kind of follow. So the first thing that the first thing that a reader will see is a general dashboard that just gives a kind of a quick overview of every major kind of area of the application. Next is followed by kind of the academic information, so your transcripts, your entries into the academic section, your test scores. And then from there, you start to see the more work experience oriented elements. So your work experience entries, your resume, the letters of recommendation, and then next comes, I think, essay and your kind of activities that you're engaged in. And the one thing we do ask of all of our readers is to save the video questions for the very end, just because it's a different sort of element of the application. It has, I think, more of ability to sort of bias an outcome. We're very careful to train our readers so that it doesn't do that too much, but just saving that kind of portion that is, a sort of a more of a face-to-face interaction for the end of the read is our best practice. So that's sort of the mechanics of how we would read an application. So Bruce, how do we evaluate fit in reviewing an application? That's a question that we get a lot.
Yeah, this is a question we get an awful lot, and it's a bit of our answer. It's a little bit of a trick question. I mean, it's a real question, and so, but I would say my eons of experience, since dinosaurs roamed the earth, um, I would say in evaluating candidates, we really try not to evaluate fit. That's not a thing that we're looking to do, and I think there are a number of reasons why that is, and it does. I think at core it gets back to the idea of being fair and consistent in our review. Fit is kind of a conclusory judgment, and it could mean many things to many different people, and therefore it's not a very stable way to evaluate a candidacy. People can see fit in different ways in the same candidate, frankly, and so we try to really be guided by the things that we can measure, the things that we can do so consistently. Fit really isn't one of them. That's not to say we don't care about people bringing in students who are kind of aligned with our mission. We're very much a mission-oriented school of educating leaders for business and society, and we care that our students, that they care about the mission, that they will uphold the mission, that means something to them. But it's not just, we don't see it as our job as sort of gatekeepers to make that determination. A lot of it happens throughout, we think of the admissions process as holistic in the sense of it includes not just our application review, but also events like this and other events that you will be part of where you learn a little bit more about the mission, the values, the character of our school and our community, where you can decide whether that's something that aligns with what you're looking to get out of an MBA program and what you're looking to do afterwards. So it's the same way we think of the admissions, the application process as a dialogue, the whole admissions process for us is a dialogue. We're making our evaluation of your candidacy, but you're also evaluating us and whether there's an alignment there in terms of the things that we represent, the things we stand for. And so we think of the application evaluation as situated in that larger process, and we're not making a unilateral decision on fit for a number of reasons, including, as I said, because it's not a fair and consistent way to evaluate, but also because we realize this is a two-way dialogue, and that's just one part of the conversation. So that's sort of how we look at fit or don't look at fit, as the case may be. So Laurel, I guess another question we often get is, does showing interest, such as visiting campus, attending events, getting alumni recommendations, or something else, does that help your chances of being admitted to the program?
Well, the simple answer is no, it does not help your chances, but those things are still really important and valuable for all the reasons that Bruce just shared, and that you're assessing us. You're assessing whether this is a place that you feel like you'll be a fit with the mission and the community. So all of those things are really, I think, valuable to do for your own understanding of whether this is a place that you see yourself engaging in your business studies. But we literally do not see any of that information as we're reviewing an application. So we don't know whether you did or didn't visit campus. If you have an alumni recommendation, I hope it's because you've had a chance to engage deeply in your professional life with an SOM alum who's your supervisor or someone you've worked very close with, because that's who makes the best recommendations. But there's no sort of additional weight given because you've made a connection with someone in the Yale SOM community. And so much about this is again, because it's not what we're assessing for, as Bruce shared with FIT, but it's also about access. We have candidates applying from all over the world, and coming and spending a day in New Haven is not equally accessible to everyone. And there's so many ways to learn about us, like this, that don't require a physical trip. So you're all more than welcome, and we encourage you to come to campus to learn more about us, but it won't have any bearing in the admissions process itself. So Bruce, does it matter if a candidate applies in round 1 versus round 2 or round 3 for that matter, since we do have 3 rounds of admission?
Yeah, I would, short answer, I think round 3, short answer is no. It really doesn't matter which round you apply in terms of your chances of being admitted. Also, people also ask about scholarships for the scholarship consideration as well. You know, we model, and I think Laurel really is the one who does the modeling. We model for the whole application cycle in advance before the start of the season, with the eye towards, as much as possible, making sure that the same application has roughly the same chance of being admitted, regardless of what round you apply in. I think round 3 can be a little bit of a wrinkle. I know some schools say you're going to have your chances of being admitted are less in round 3. It's not inherently the case. It's just a little less predictable, just because the round 3 decisions are informed by how many people enrolled from rounds 1 and rounds 2. And so it's just a little more unstable. But it could be, depending on where we come relative to the model, if we will have as many spaces as we're anticipating, or we could have more or less. It could be actually easier to get in round 3. It's just a question of what the rest of the year looks like. So really, it's the advice we give, which I think you probably hear from other schools as well, is apply when you have your strongest application prepared. So don't rush to apply in round 1 or round 2. If taking a little extra time would allow you to improve your candidacy, if you wanted to retake a test or gain more work experience or secure a recommendation that for someone who maybe couldn't submit earlier, do the things you need to do to present your strongest candidacy, and don't be as concerned about which round that is.
A little bit of an add-on to that question. So this has been an interesting and at times challenging year for our matriculating international students. Any general advice, either as it applies to the rounds for international students or just approaching the process as a whole?
Yeah, no, this has definitely been interesting times. I should say, as we're presenting right now, our orientation will start in 3 days on Monday. We're recording this on a Friday. Orientation starts on Monday. It's been an interesting spring and summer, just because for international candidates, there's been so much uncertainty. There were kind of, for those of you who are, tuned into the process, there were pauses on sort of visa interviews. There were kind of wrinkles. There were travel bans, threatened or real. So we weren't sure. And we worked very closely with our incoming international students, with our office, the Yale's Office of International Students and Scholars, which is the organization that works with students and Yale other Yale members from outside the U.S. and to get them here and also to support them while they're here. We've also engaged with an immigration attorney to help in tricky cases as they've come up. And so as it turns out, just about everybody who from outside the U.S. who wanted to be here was able to make it here, with a couple of very small exceptions. The result is our class is actually going to be a little bit larger than we'd anticipated, because we didn't know if everybody would make it, but they pretty much did. So what I would say, translating that for those of you who are thinking about applying this upcoming cycle, obviously it's a huge asterisk, because we don't know what changes will happen, what else will change about the process. But we're hopeful that we will have the same success this upcoming cycle that we had this past cycle, in terms of students being able to get here to Yale. I mean, even as recently as today, got an email from someone who wasn't sure if he could make it, and he's going to make it. So it's great. What that means, though, in terms of when to apply, I would say, we admit people from outside the U.S. in all 3 rounds, and even sometimes past round 3. So it's not as though applying in round 3 is inherently a non-starter or challenging. But I think for international applicants, the sooner you can apply and be into the process, the better. So I made that, maybe that's one caveat. So maybe if you're able to apply in round 1 or round 2 as opposed to round 3, that can position you a little bit better to have more time for the visa process as one part of the process. Again, we've admitted people in round 3 from outside the US, and they're going to get here by Monday. So it can work, but I think just giving yourself the greatest chance can be helpful. So it could be round 2. Round 1 is as Laurel says, our September round, September 10th. The round 2 is our January round. Round 3 is in April. So if you're able to apply by January, I think that could position you a little bit better for the visa process. But obviously, if you can't apply until round 3, apply when you have your strongest application. And again, we've had success with that as well. I don't know, does that sound like what you would say as well, Laurel? I know this is kind of
Yeah, absolutely. And just to put even finer point on it, I don't think there's any difference between round 1 and round 2 as an international student, because the processes that you would undergo to enroll as an international experience won't kick in until after the round 2 timeframe anyway. So I think those are completely, the equivalent from that perspective. And round 3 is it's inherently just less predictable for all the reasons that you already shared. So I don't think that that is a sure bet. Do not apply in round 3. It's just sitting here in August of 2025. It's really hard to know what April of 2026 will bring. So if you are more risk averse, I think the earlier 2 rounds probably make a lot more sense. Just for your own peace of mind. And I know that obviously no one from OISS is sitting here on this call, but just to put out into the universe, that group is incredibly strong at Yale. I think that's one of the really nice parts of being part of the university that welcomes so many international students across all of our programs and schools. Is we just have a truly best-in-class team that really kind of is on top of everything and can seemingly see into the future and know kind of the best ways to navigate kind of changes writ large, and then works with an incredible amount of detail with individual students. So I think that that's been really a huge asset to us. So wherever you are in the world, OISS, we're incredibly grateful for you.
Yeah, no, I second that. They're an amazing team, and they serve the students well and support them incredibly. Shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to ask, is there anything that automatically disqualifies an applicant from consideration?
I don't think so. I mean, that's sort of the nature of holistic admission. There's no sort of one aspect of the application that we're going to see from the get-go and say, okay, no more. So that applies to test scores. Again, we review every single application by multiple individuals. And so I think this question often comes up in the context of something like GPAs or test scores. And is there anything that is just going to automatically disqualify me? The answer is no one individual thing. Obviously, we're looking for balance then. So if you have a score that's in the lower range, then we're looking for other academic evidence elsewhere, but there's no single element. The other thing I'll mention, which is kind of a really specific concern, but I know some of our candidates have, is we, like most programs, will ask you a number of questions about if you've ever been subject to academic discipline or legal discipline of any nature. And for some people, this won't apply, but if it does, I can imagine that this is one of those areas where you're like, gosh, does that mean you're asking me this, does that mean my application goes no further? If my answer to the question is yes, and I'll say now that's not the case. In fact, we've thought a lot about how this information gets received by our within our reading process. And we made a change a couple of years ago to actually suppress that information during an application review. And we have a separate committee of a number of us, both in the admissions team and from other areas of the school, that look at that information separately, because we know that the circumstances surrounding any kind of discipline can be really complicated and potentially really biasing towards the rest of the application process. So we separate that out, and we, determine as a more consistent and smaller team whether there's any additional information we need to understand the situation and so on. But that all is to say is there's truly no one aspect of your application that can disqualify you from moving forward in the process. Bruce, are there any unique aspects of the Yale application process that you think are worth calling out? And maybe we'll go into a little bit more depth about them as we go.
Yeah, and yeah, I think there are obviously, and I think I won't go into too much detail because I think we will dig, soon we're going to dig into the individual elements and talk a little bit more detail about those things. Obviously we asked for some of the same things that other schools ask for in terms of your kind of academic background, your transcripts, your resume, your work history. We asked for recommendations. So those are some of the things you might be familiar with and see at other, and applying to other schools. But we do have a few elements that are somewhat more unique to us. I would flag our video questions and our behavioral assessment. A couple other schools, I think, have some form of video questions. We're on the early end in terms of pioneering that. And again, as Laurel mentioned, that's something that we ask a couple questions of you. These are post-submission elements. So these are things after you hit submit. You will get access to the video questions and the behavioral assessment. And the idea is to provide a couple of extemporaneous, so in the moment responses to some pre-recorded questions that we've actually recorded for you. And the idea again, I think Laurel, you say we use these with the video questions with a light touch. It's not going to drive an outcome. It's not going to be the main element in any sort of decision. But it gives us a little bit of incremental insight. It gives a little bit more of a kind of a holistic sense of you as a candidate. So that's one element, which I'm happy to talk more about. And then the behavioral assessment is something we've had in place for a number of years as well. It's a newer, but the idea is it's a forced choice assessment that gives us a sense of it's a non-cognitive assessment that gives us a sense of some intra and interpersonal qualities that we feel are helpful in assessing your academic preparation for the program. So it's not a EQ test, it's not a soft skills test. It really actually informs and supplements our review of your academics, of your undergraduate record, of your test score, and provides, as Laurel just talked about in terms of nothing's disqualifying. Actually, the behavioral assessment we use to help us be more expansive in terms of the range of qualifications we can look at and we can consider, and really kind of being more open to a broader background of candidates from an academic preparation perspective. So that's a little bit about those two. We can go into more detail a little bit later, but so there a lot of our application is similar to what you might see elsewhere. But then there are those additional elements. And also, as we've talked about, we try to think about, what we're asking, when we're asking. So trying to be maybe how we're asking things maybe is a little bit different than some other schools, maybe hopefully a little more efficient, a little less stressful, a little more straightforward.
Great.
Actually going into the elements, why don't we dig into kind of the different parts of the application and talk in a little more detail, some specific advice about them. And maybe we could start with where a lot of people start, academics and test scores. So your academic preparation, and so I guess one question: what are we looking for in evaluating transcripts and test scores?
Yeah, a number of things. So in a nutshell, what we're really looking to understand is, are we setting you up to succeed in the classroom at Yale SOM? We want to bring people in who are going to be able to take full advantage of the academic experience here and also not feel like they're struggling through the entire program. And the best, over all the research we've done over the years, the best evidence that we have of academic preparation is, to absolutely no one's surprise, your previous academic preparation. But what that actually means is more complicated than just a GPA that you've produced from your undergrad experience at the end of the day. We do look at your GPA, but that's one element of many. We're really looking to understand your entire transcripts, the sorts of courses that you challenged yourself with, what the trajectory of your grades are. Some people have, an adjustment period as they're moving into school, or specific periods within their academic experience where they've had, challenges that they're dealing with, or other kind of other factors in play. So it's not just, where does all of your grades kind of average out to at the end of the day. We're really trying to understand that academic experience throughout your entire transcript. And I should include that, an undergraduate transcript is the common denominator for every applicant because it is a requirement that you've completed an undergraduate degree to come. But sometimes we have supplemental information. So some of you might be coming with a graduate degree already underway or achieved. Some of you might have taken coursework for, not for a degree program, but outside of your academic experience. So we're looking at all of that information when I say kind of your previous academics. And those are welcomed as well. But we will have an undergraduate experience from everyone. Within that, we're looking at how you performed in whatever your area of study would be. We've done a lot of analysis over the years that show you're not particularly advantaged in any way coming from, for instance, a quantitative background or having studied business as an undergraduate or economics. People do well in the Yale SOM curriculum from a variety of different academic backgrounds. So there's no special weighting or preference given to quantitative backgrounds. But with that, we are looking to understand your quantitative preparation. As I mentioned before, if you have that background within your undergraduate experience, we'll be looking at that. And if you haven't had that background, we'll be looking at the quantitative aspect of your testing a little bit more heavily. And then as a whole, I just focused on sort of the transcript and the academic side of things, but we are looking at your test scores in combination with that information. So again, if you have an extremely strong academic background, testing as a whole may not be weighted quite so heavily, but then vice versa. If your academic background is not as strong as you would have liked, or things did get in the way of your performance there, I would look at the testing as an opportunity to provide a more recent counterpoint to the academic information. So again, I know testing is no one's favorite thing going into the application experience, but I think in many cases, it can actually provide a helpful boost or counterpoint to undergrad academics, because you can't go back and change those at this point. You're really just looking forward.
And I think that's all great information. I guess maybe a quick follow-up. So if your grades or scores are below average, what's the best way to address that?
Again, think about the two of them in combination. So you can't go back and redo your undergrad experience. So if those are that experience and those results aren't as strong as you wanted, I would really focus on the test and being able to show here is a more recent sampling of what I'm capable of academically. I guess the other area that I touched upon a little bit is actual academic preparation that you could do more of. So I'm not a big fan of suggesting, for the purposes of being admitted to a school, you should go and take X, Y, and Z courses. It's expensive, it's time consuming. It's not necessarily what I'm advising here, but if you do want to provide another sort of academic counterpoint to your testing or to your undergraduate experience, I think there's a couple of courses that I just universally recommend as helpful in preparing for an MBA program. And in my mind, that tends to be some kind of statistics preparation and then microeconomics. It's rare that you'll enter an MBA program where you're not going to have to take some kind of coursework in those areas. And as a person who had limited exposure in that area, myself going into an MBA program, those are the two things that I think, in retrospect would be most helpful in just having some recent grounding in. So if you do want to show a more recent academic experience as any kind of counterpoint, those are two areas I'd really suggest focusing on. And doing it in the most formal way that you can. I know it's not always practical to go and sit in a local community college or a local institution to sit for those sorts of courses, although I think that's going to be the most similar to an academic experience in business school. But shy of that, doing something that really kind of reflects a syllabus that you would find in a full semester course in one of those areas, I think is your best bet, both for the preparation it'll give you and for providing some academic evidence of, your readiness.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe one last question about sort of that the academic background and test scores that we tend to get a lot actually. So maybe it's good to put out there is do we offer test score waivers?
We do not. So I hope I've given adequate confidence of why we don't need to, in that it's not going to be the be all and end all of anyone's application. Um, but we feel it's important to give an equal kind of application experience and have equal information from all of our candidates when assessing an application. And so a part of that is making sure that we're collecting the same application elements from everyone. So no test score waivers. We do require either a GMAT or a GRE. We have absolutely no preference between the two. Many years of evaluating both of those tests. But we do require that score from everyone, and like I've already shared, it doesn't mean that it has the same weighting for everyone, but we at least have that information.
Mhm. That
So
makes sense.
hopefully that's a good overview to the academics, although we will return to the behavioral assessment a little bit later because that's that really does play a role in our academic assessment as well.
Yeah.
But why don't we turn to that next kind of key area that they shared up top that we're looking to understand is, someone's professional impact and potential. So thinking about that section, we have a lot of different inputs to that. We have resume, we have the work experience section where we ask you a few questions about your individual experiences. We get letters of recommendation. So there's a lot of stuff that feeds into that. But a couple of questions that come up pretty commonly in this area. I'll start with, what if I have either more or fewer years than the average work experience for an MBA candidate? What do I do with that?
Yeah, that's a question we get a lot. And I would start by saying, just by way of background, similar to sort of your academic profile, we use that, your past performance, to try to predict future academic performance. Similarly, we look at your past professional experience to try and get a sense of your potential for future impact. And that's one of the things we're trying to gauge. And obviously, it's a dual focus. We're not looking just at, it's not a PhD program, so we're not looking at just academic performance as the guiding principle. We're also looking at that professional piece as well. And as Laurel said, we've got your resume, we've got your work experience, we have recommendations, and I would say, we are looking uh, at impact. We're looking at what you've been able to accomplish in whatever time you've had working in your professional life. And I would say I think the average years of work experience for us is probably about 4.5 years, between 4 and 5 years. I would say about the mid 80% is maybe 2 to 7 years. But even beyond that, we have silver scholars. We have candidates coming directly from undergraduate with no experience. We have a program specifically for that. You graduate in the spring, you start with us in the fall. We have people with tenure marks, years of experience. So it's really kind of a bell curve in terms of the range of experience that people have. And I think it's probably dictated as much by where the applicant pool is. By we're not trying to shade one way or the other. I think we have fewer people at the tails, but we do have people at the tails, and we're open to people with either less experience or more experience. And if you can tell us kind of why an MBA and why now, I think the question is the same for everybody who's applying, but the answer might be different, just where you are in your path and why you what you want the MBA for and what you want to do with it. So we're open to that question. We're open to answer whatever answer you come up with wherever you are on your professional path. We're not looking to, again, the mid 80% is pretty wide, so say 2 to 7 years. We're not trying to force fit everybody into that 4.5 year kind of point. That just happens to be where things kind of average out. But we have people earlier, we have people later. And I think the thing you need to think about as you're applying, again, are those questions. Why do I want an MBA? And why is now the right time? And if that can inform your candidacy, again, as I said, we're open to considering people from coming from various backgrounds, various paths, going into various places. So it's really those are the questions that are kind of guiding our review, and maybe you should think about as you're putting together your application.
Yeah. And another question that comes up a lot is many career paths are not linear. How should a candidate explain either gaps in work experience or periods of unemployment, or even if a candidate is unemployed while they're applying
Yeah,
to an MBA program?
yeah, I would say first, we do have a part of the application where we ask about gaps of 3 months or greater. So I think definitely that if you have that, you should use that section to tell us about those gaps. Beyond that, I would say, um, you know, I think just about everybody experiences some form of unemployment, some form of work disruption. It's terrible to go through it. It's really just an incredibly unsettling thing, and we're incredibly sympathetic to that. And I think, sadly, I feel like the last year, or maybe, there's a last stretch, year to couple years, we've seen the heightened degree of job kind of instability. People, whether it's kind of reductions in force, kind of layoffs, any number of things, kind of sort of industry shifting. So AI has been disruptive. So we've seen that, I feel like, increasingly, and just in addition, on a human level, being sympathetic to the stress and challenges that presents from an admissions perspective. We've become, we're sensitive to the market conditions that are influencing these disruptions. What that means, that it's not, it doesn't disqualify people and make you uncompetitive, or kind of, as to, I guess, Laurel, to your previous point, is there anything that would be the question, is there anything that would automatically disqualify you? Having those job disruptions, or even currently being unemployed, is not an automatic disqualification. I think the thing you want to think about as you're applying is, and the thing we're looking for is, what are you doing to try to continue to progress, develop yourself, develop your professional profile. Obviously, getting back, if you're unemployed, getting back into the workforce. But even absent that, are you taking courses? Are you joining associations? Are you doing things? Are you doing volunteer work? Are you doing things to continue to improve yourself and position yourself? That's the thing we care about. It's not just where you are now, but what are you doing about where you are now, and how are you addressing that? And so as we're looking for it, as we're looking at your candidacy, those are the types of questions we're asking ourselves.
That's all right. And that's all sort of backwards looking, which is where the majority of our assessment is, because as I think we've said a few times, we're big believers that the past behavior and past performance is the best predictor that we've got of future performance. But we do ask questions about future looking things in the career realm as well. So common question we get is, do I need to have a detailed post MBA career plan?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, if the question is detailed post MBA plan, I would say no. We're not, again, somewhat like fit. We know that you are likely, I think probably, 75, 80% of students change what they end up doing from what they said they were going to do on the front end. So it's not a very stable data point. We're not making value judgments about what is a worthy and what is not a worthy, MBA goal. We know you're going to be doing lots of different things you can be doing, especially if you're coming into a program like Yale. Like, you'll be able to do pretty much whatever you want, and you'll probably change what you want to do, because you will learn about opportunities that you didn't know existed. You'll be talking to classmates who are doing things you didn't know existed, or you find really interesting. You'll be getting, networking with your classmates, sort of networks, and learning about these new things. So what you want to do is going to change. So we're not making judgments, or not making decisions based on what you say you want to do. And you don't need to know, you don't need to know, in great detail, what you want to do sort of 5, 10, 20 years out. You should have a sense of why you want to get an MBA. You should be, the MBA should be something that's pulling you, as opposed to being pushed away from what you're doing now. Like, I'm at a dead end. I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to get an MBA and figure it out. That's probably not a great reason for getting an MBA. You should have something you're looking to do, even just directionally, after the MBA. And we want to know about that. And we also want to know how you develop that, how you think about that. It's really more about, for us at least, more about your thought process, how you're positioning yourself, how you're thinking about those opportunities and those post MBA goals, as opposed to just what they are and kind of having some detailed plan. We're less interested in that.
I think that makes sense.
Um, and I would say, just one last thing. I would say, we don't, we're not making, as I said, value judgments. We're not trying to assess whether something you're looking to do is realistic. As I said, if you're coming to Yale and you're getting your MBA, you pretty much can do what you want to do. So we assume what you want to do is realistic. Um, I'd love to, I know we have maybe 15 minutes left. We have a little more to go on the application, and then if we have time for our favorites, and then some, wrap it up with some best app advice over writ large. I'd love to talk about the essay, which is definitely a topic we get lots of questions about. We have three choices for an essay topic, which is to describe your biggest commitment, your most meaningful community, or your greatest challenge. You choose one of the three. And I guess the fundamental question is, why are these the essay questions?
Yeah, and I would characterize these all as sort of flavors of the same question in our mind, which is we want to get you talking about something that's meaningful to you and has played a significant role in your life in one way or another. And for many, many years, our sole question was around biggest commitment. And I think what we found is we were essentially getting versions of responses to that fell into these different areas, and we're not looking to unnecessarily constrain how you identify kind of the most meaningful thing that you've encountered. And so we broadened it to allow you to kind of get at that question through a few different angles. But what we're really looking to understand is what has played a significant role in your life and how have you addressed it? So that's the part that's most, I think, important, even more so than the topic that you choose. We'll talk about the topic, I think, a little bit in a moment, but what we're really looking to understand is your approach to either that commitment, that community, or that challenge. Again, back to that idea that your past behavior is the most important predictor that we've got of how you've behaved in the future. This is a platform for you to share with us how you've approached something that's been really meaningful to you. And when you think about what's been really meaningful to you, probably two or three things come to mind immediately. I would not overthink it. I'd pick one of those, whichever you think is going to be easiest for you to write about or most kind of fruitful for you to write about. You can't go wrong, but this isn't meant to be sort of a trick question for you to find the perfect topic for us. Again, whatever topic you pick, you can talk a little bit about why that topic was meaningful to you, but you're going to want to spend majority of those 500 words, or could be less, that you respond to that essay prompt with, talking about how you've approached that commitment, community, or challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. And well, a question we often get a lot, probably one of the more common questions, should the topic be personal or professional? Does it matter if it's one? Does it need to be professional?
No, it doesn't need to be one or the other. One isn't inherently better than the other. My response to that question is always just to challenge whoever is asking to think, you have a lot of opportunities to talk about your professional life within the application already. We just talked through some of the aspects of the professional section. So I push yourself to think about, is there something beyond what I've already shared about my professional life that would make sense to address in the essay? Is there something personal or some aspect of my professional life that hasn't come through already in spades through the areas of the application that are specifically addressing your professional background? But that doesn't mean it's inherently better to give a personal example. Again, I advise people to think through, can I share some new information, something above and beyond or that supplements what I've already shared professionally.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Another question we often get, I know applicants often want to explain why an MBA and why Yale, and the prompt
Mhm.
doesn't expressly ask that. Should candidates put that in there? Why an MBA and why Yale?
No, we definitely would have designed a question around why an MBA and why, if that's what we were looking for. This isn't sort of a trick question and a way to tie it all neatly up in a bow. 500 words, it can go pretty quickly, so I would not waste precious real estate answering any question that we haven't asked you explicitly here. If the topic you've picked fits really naturally into this, I mean, I'm not going to say don't include it in any way, but I really promise you, we're not trying to ask, in a tricky way for you to insert this information to the essay. You'll have other opportunities within the application experience, I think, to address these kinds of questions. So I would stick to the topic.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. You covered a good bit of ground. Just any other general essay question guidance, what we don't want to see or any other things we
Yeah.
should do?
The thing that comes up all the time now is AI use, especially as it pertains to the essay questions. And maybe we could talk about this a little bit when we move on to video questions or interviews as well. But get a lot of questions around what are the expectations around AI use or not using AI within the essay. And I guess it was maybe last cycle we introduced for the first time within our application an AI kind of guidance statement, which still holds true. But to summarize, I'd say our expectations are not that you've completely shunned AI use in your application. Realistically, it is making its way into all of our daily work. I think it would not make sense for us to expect it doesn't in the application as well. But we're still expecting the application to be truthful, your own voice, your own content. You're still signing a statement of honesty that speaks to all of those things. And so if you are going to use AI, I'd suggest using it the same way that you would, or maybe are using, a trusted friend or colleague to help with your application ideation, brainstorming, bouncing ideas, refining ideas, spell checking at the end of an essay. So all that is to say is AI should not be writing your essay. And I think if you do have AI write your essay, you're going to end up with a product that's much more generic and much less authentic and individual to you than if you had done this yourself, and that's not going to serve your application as a whole. So not prohibited, but use it in additive and kind of, helpful ways to help you kind of work through topics and maybe structure, but the end product should be your own.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know we're short on time. One quick thing, this is a little bit of, recommendations. I know that they're largely out of the hands of applicants. Any piece of advice about asking recommenders? Because once you do that, then you're done. But is there anything about who to ask or how to ask that you'd say?
I think and we have a lot of good, I think, materials on recommendations and elsewhere, so I won't spend too much time here. But the two things I always keep in mind are recency and proximity. So recency, we want to know who you are in the workplace today or as close as today as possible. So think about people who can speak to your most recent experience, at least for one of the two recommendations you'll provide. And then proximity, we'd really like to hear from a supervisor, ideally a current supervisor, but we know for lots of reasons that's not always possible, but someone who has been working very closely with you and is responsible for your development and your growth and your feedback. So those are the two things I'd keep in mind for letters of recommendation.
Yeah, sounds
We're
good.
rounding out the elements of the application, and Bruce, you already spoke a little bit to video questions and behavioral
Yeah,
assessment, but let's dive just a little bit more into. I think you gave a pretty good description earlier of what the video questions are,
yeah.
but maybe you want to give some advice on how to best kind of prepare for responding to the video questions.
Yeah, I would, and I think that's a question we do get a lot of people wondering what, how to approach them, what they should do to sort of make sure that they do well. And again, I would emphasize we're not leaning heavily on them, so don't stress out. It's not as though this is going to be driving your admission decision. It's just kind of incremental insights, both with the video question and the behavioral assessment. These are kind of secondary, tertiary traits that can inform. I would say, just one key thing is you want to have just a general sense of your your application, your background, have a general familiarity. But more than anything else, just be ready to answer your question. Don't I think somewhat to the AI thing, an authentic question that's imperfect, that is you speaking genuinely and sincerely to the camera, is better than something that you've tried to script out, like written out or kind of thrown into ChatGPT, that you're reading off in a kind of in a rote way. We can tell, and it doesn't reflect well. We're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for this perfectly crafted jewel. So don't feel stressed that you need to get it exactly right. We realize this is your in the moment, it's off the cuff. So I think the key thing is to relax, take the practice questions, feel comfortable with the platform, and then you'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna upvote that one. It's just the worst when someone reads off of a script. It's just the worst. Don't do it. It is everything that you said. Authentic is way better there. And then thinking about the behavioral assessment. So maybe if you want to touch just a little bit more about how we use the behavioral
Yeah.
assessment in the process, and then similarly anything to do to prepare for that.
Yeah. I would say behavioral assessment, there's really nothing you can do to prepare or you should do, and really nothing you can do. What it is, I don't know if I explained before, it's 130 paired statements that describe a person, two positive, two negative, things like, I arrive early for meetings, or I like lots of free time, or my desk is messy or neat or whatever. And you have to describe which of those two statements is most like you. And you go through 130 of these. It takes about sort of 20, 25 minutes. And after that, it will present a sort of profile. We use this, again, it's not an EQ, it's not a soft skills. We use this to inform our review of your academic preparation for the program. And we really only use it for people for whom are questions, for whom, your grade score profile is softer than we would otherwise see, or we would otherwise kind of typically bring into the class. Although again, there are no cutoffs, no minimum of anything, but it helps to supplement that. So if you're and it's only in those instances, and it gives us more comfort in your academic preparation and your ability to perform in the classroom. So it actually we really only use it to lift people up, and only for certain subset of applicants. If your academics are fine, then it doesn't really inform your candidacy. It's really only to help us expand our review, expand the range of candidates we can bring in, and really only looking at that academic piece as a supplement to your transcripts and your test scores. Hope that helps.
Yep, yep,
Uh,
sounds good.
yeah, but nothing to prepare, nothing to think about. It's all questions about you. Just go through it quickly and don't really overthink it, is the key.
I think
All right.
that's good
So
advice there.
what's that?
I said I think that's the right advice there.
Hopefully so. We only have a couple minutes left. Do we dispense with the Yale New Haven stuff, or do you want to do one or two of those, or just skip it all together?
Let me conduct this as a true lightning round. Okay, so I'm gonna say the category, then you're gonna quickly say your answer, and I'll say mine. So these are Yale, New Haven little tidbits that we're throwing out there. So Bruce, favorite activity?
I don't do it a lot, but Sleeping Giant State Park. When it's nice out, hiking is great.
I would say just walking in New Haven in general. It's a really walkable town. Favorite building?
I would say it's got to be the Beinecke Rare Book Library, which has all the Gutenberg Bible and lots of amazing, but it's all stone but translucent, and when it's light out, it's beautiful inside.
Right, we're both nerds. I'm going to go with Sterling Memorial Library as well. Lots of beautiful libraries on campus. Best restaurant, non-pizza.
I mean, I think we've done this before, and I think I've used this one. I have to say, a House of Naan. The tikka fries, I just are kind of addictive, so I'm gonna stick with that.
Okay, I'm going to say Camacho Garage, which is a little off the beaten path, but nice Mexican place. All right, best coffee.
Best coffee. I would go with coffee with a K and a question mark, which is a few blocks from SOM. I'm not so much into coffee aficionado. I don't know if it's any better, but it's just kind of a fun, like it's a small, locally owned, kind of nice vibe. So I like that.
Okay, I'm going to go with pistachio, which is a little bit more of a recent addition to the scene, but also really, really good, like Middle Eastern treats. All right, and then obviously, if we're talking about New Haven, best pizza.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many choices. I'm gonna stick with Sally's. I've always been a Pepe's person for other reasons, but I think if you're talking about just the pizza itself, you got to go Sally's. And my favorite is it's not a traditional one, but it's the potato and rosemary pie, which has no sauce. It's delicious.
Okay, I'm going to go with bar. So much like what Bruce mentioned, coffee. We have really creatively named places here. One of them called and they have really good pizza. And so brew their own beer there. But I'm a big fan of the hot cherry pepper pie at bar. Should we return to final words of wisdom?
Yeah,
Almost no time for the application. I think we covered a lot of ground.
yeah. Hopefully, cover good ground. I think we're at the hour mark, so we're going a little bit over, and I apologize. Hopefully, we'll indulge us. But just a couple minutes with some wrap up, overarching pieces of advice. I'm happy. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
You could kick it off.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, hopefully you glean this a little bit from what we said already. It sounds really kind of basic, but don't try to predict what we're looking for. As hopefully you got a sense, we're open to a very wide range of backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, aspirations. We're not looking for any one thing, so don't try to present yourself as a particular profile or think that you need to get X, Y, or Z in there. The most compelling thing you can do is be yourself, be who you are. That always comes through, and that's the thing that will make you stick out the most.
Yeah. And I think maybe a corollary to that, trying to be different can make you look the same. It's really hard to keep track of sort of a persona that you've tried to develop for a given business school. So don't do that. Just be yourself, answer the questions, and I think we've given you a really good platform to just put your best foot forward from your academic and your professional background.
Yeah. I think part of that being yourself is embracing your mistakes. I mean, we talked about this maybe most notably in the context of unemployment. There's no such thing as a perfect candidate. Nobody has no warts or no kind of well, like hiccups in their profile or kind of things that are maybe less strong. There's no, and I think we talked about this in the context of what if something's below average. Like we're looking at everything holistically. Everybody, has things that are below and above average. So don't. I think the thing you can help us with is explaining them. Explain if you had a poor semester or if you have some employment, uneven employment history, or have something else that looks a little bit unusual, explain it for us. So, don't leave it to us to kind of try to figure it out for ourselves and come up with some maybe less charitable explanation. Own the mistake, take it, in the law we call it drawing the sting. If you address it on your terms, you'll be able to help us get past it more easily.
I think Bruce mentioned this at the top of the hour. We really do think of this process as a dialogue, and I hope you've gotten the sense. We care a lot about this stuff. We give a lot of thought to our application and asking you the questions that are going to allow us to assess things in the most comprehensive and fair way as possible. So I hope you kind of trust us on this one and engage in that dialogue by just answering what we have asked, and not what you wanted us to ask, maybe. I think guess that we've hopefully given you ample opportunity to get at all of the things that will help us assess your candidacy.
Yeah, and maybe somewhat building from that, we know that the application process is inherently it's stressful, it's kind of anxiety inducing, it's not inherently a fun thing. But try to embrace it, try to approach it with a spirit of kind of self-reflection, self-assessment. You know, we're trying to make it as sort of transparent and straightforward as possible so that we are only asking the things we care about and we're trying to engage you in the dialogue, as Laura says. Kind of meet us with that same mindset, that same approach. Hopefully, you will know more about yourself at the end than you did at the beginning. And then the byproduct is you'll get into a great business school and have a great experience. But really, if you approach it with that kind of mindset of kind of self-discovery and self-exploration, it can actually make the process much more enriching and feel less like this kind of bad, negative thing you have to go through.
I always think this one's sort of funny to end on after we've spent an hour talking at a rapid pace about every aspect of the application. But maybe to close it out, don't overthink it. I mean, obviously, you're going to put a lot of effort into the process of applying to business school and ultimately choosing a business school to go to. But don't overthink it in the sense that hopefully you've gotten the idea. There's no one perfect combination of traits and things you can put into an application that are going to ensure a particular outcome. So do your best, answer the questions that we've put out there, and then hit submit and just let it rest from there. And just celebrate the fact that you've gone through this really challenging and hopefully rewarding process, and you're going to have a great outcome from there. So hopefully that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sorry for going a few minutes over. Hopefully, it was helpful. I want to actually and hopefully you found this hour plus to be kind of valuable. Belatedly, I should have done this at the beginning. We want to kind of acknowledge our colleagues, Jen and Modesta, who are on this session as well, and have fed some things into the chat. We didn't take questions, but they put up upcoming events, our application guide, and our class profile. Those are hopefully all helpful information for you. The application guide really goes into even more detail about some of this stuff and covers other things, some of the things we've talked about, but goes beyond that as well. It's a great resource. Put a lot of effort into that. We do have lots of upcoming events. I think on Tuesday, I've got an office hours. We have Q&As. We have other sessions coming up in addition to kind of being out on the road and also welcoming people to campus. So please take advantage of the resources. We hope that they're helpful. We look forward to engaging you through the rest of the process, seeing your application, whether it's in round one, our September 10th deadline coming up in a little around a month, in January, or even in our April round. So thank you so much. Thank you to Jen and Modesta. Thanks, Laurel, for sharing all these insights, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day and great weekend.
Here, everyone.